Hey, this is a book I'm going to read. It's for Gabriel. It's part of your Christmas present, Gabriel. And I am reading this to you on the day after Thanksgiving, 2022. I just traveled all day yesterday from Buffalo, New York to Denver, Colorado to Oakland, California to Santa Rosa, California, and now I'm home. It was a long day. I went home and I slept and slept and slept and slept. And I've been doing things today, but one of my goals is to read you this book for your Christmas present because I need to get it in the mail and get it to you for Christmas. So, you and I talked about a lot of things when I was visiting. And one of the things we talked about a little bit was Luther Burbank. And he was a scientist. I don't think he started out to be a scientist, he was just exploring and experimenting, just like you do all the time. And one of the things he was experimenting with was how to make new plants out of existing plants. And it turned out he made hundreds of new plants. And a lot of them we use today, and we don't even know that they came from Luther Burbank. So here is a fun book about him. Do you remember the book Henry's Awful Mistake? And inside the front cover were all those ants. This book is written by the same author who wrote Henry's Awful Mistake, but this one is about Luther Burbank. So I thought you'd enjoy it because he's such a fun author. Okay, so this is called Here a Plant, There a Plant, Everywhere a Plant, Plant. Old MacDonald had a farm. Here a plant, there a plant, everywhere a plant, plant. It says a story of Luther Burbank, written by Robert Quackenbush, and I bet he is the illustrator also. And there is a picture of Luther Burbank sitting on a bench in his garden. And actually, Uncle Joe and I recently went to his garden. So here is a picture of the inside of the cover. And actually, at his garden is a huge, tall cactus, twice the size of Uncle Joe. I actually have a picture of him standing next to it. And so this is put out by the Luther Burbank Home and Gardens. And it says, here a plant, there a plant, everywhere a plant, plant. And look at it. It says, ha-choo. It says, for Pieth and Margie. Maybe I should put on my reading glasses so I could read this. So here is your picture. Here's Luther Burbank as a boy. And he is catching all kinds of animals and insects and reptiles. Does he remind you of a boy that you know? Look at, there's a snake wrapped around his leg. He's got a cactus plant. He loved nature. Okay, that is what we get from that. Luther Burbank, the 13th of 15 children. I'm going to hold the cover up so you can look at that. The 13th of 15 children. He was the 13th of 15 children. You're the second child. He's the 13th of 15. That's almost like my grandfather. He was like 11th or something. Wow. And was born on March 7th in 1849 in Lancaster, Massachusetts. He grew up on a farm knowing mud pies, grasshoppers, water bugs, tadpoles, mud turtles, trees to climb, brooks to wade in, rocks to roll, woodchucks, bats, bees, butterflies, sand snakes, and hornets. But he loved plants most of all. Even a potted cactus gave him more pleasure than any toy. He got this love of plants from his mother, who had a wonderful garden and an unusual talent for making things grow. Okay. Sounds like he was able to, and look at, so, look at, I broke my cactus. Poor guy broke his cactus. So here he is, all grown up, and he is just gardening and gardening and gardening and gardening. And there's a dog. All right. And the box says, early rose potato. At the age of 21, Burbank completed his education at Lancaster Academy. Soon after that, his father died. With his small inheritance, Luther bought land. He had already decided to make plant breeding his life work. To earn money, he had a truck garden producing vegetables for sale at the market in a nearby town. But in his free hours, he experimented with creating better vegetables. He would save the seeds from only his sturdiest and best plants. Then he would nurture these superior varieties through several generations until he created the better breeds. He especially wanted to create a better potato. He knew there was a great demand for a whiter, larger potato to replace the undersized reddish variety. Then one day he had an amazing stroke of good fortune. Burbank discovered a rare seed ball with 23 seeds ripening on one of his early rose potato plants. He knew that these seeds could grow seedlings, one of which might possibly turn up the potato he was seeking. A playful dog nearly got away with the prize, but Burbank got it back. Rover, come back. The seed ball is not your ball. Here is your ball in my hand. Okay, so here was the seed ball from potatoes. I don't know if the story of the dog's true, but the main part about growing is true. Okay, so it says Burbank spuds. Spuds is another word for potato. They're super. So there he is with his bigger potatoes and whiter, which are the ones we use today. We call them russet potatoes. Burbank carefully tended and planted the seeds, which produced 23 healthy seedlings. As they grew, 2 of the plants produced larger, whiter, and sweeter potatoes than Burbank had ever seen before. The next year, he planted potatoes from these 2 plants, and they in turn produced even larger potatoes than any yet grown. The chance seed ball had given the world the Burbank potato, which today yields millions of dollars every year to its growers. But Burbank sold his prized new variety to a seed man for only $150. However, this was just enough money for what Burbank had in mind: a railroad ticket to California. He packed his suitcase with a few clothes and 10 of his potatoes that he had been allowed to keep. The warmer western climate where he would grow things all year round was where he wanted to be. And he says, California, here I come. And California means here where I live. Alrighty. So here's a picture. Luther Burbank. I don't know what he's doing. I guess we have to read to find out. Look at that pig. He's eating grapes. Burbank was overjoyed when he arrived in Santa Rosa, California in 1875. And that's where I live. And that's where I'm sitting right now in Santa Rosa, California. And not far from my house are the Luther Burbank Gardens. It was all he dreamed of it would be and more. He wrote home about the wonders he found there: cabbages as big as wash tubs, squash 3 feet long, and grapes so plentiful they were used for feeding the hog. Burbank was known for his habit of telling tall tales, meaning he exaggerated a little bit. And his family and friends knew better than to believe everything he said. But one thing that was clear: Burbank was enthusiastic about California, and he was willing to do any kind of job, like cleaning chicken coops, so he could stay. In between odd jobs, he raised plants on small plots of land that he bought with money he saved. All right, so that's him writing home about these amazing things. And then here, it shows him scooping up and cleaning out the chicken pen. And he says, with cluck cluck here and a cluck cluck there, here cluck, there cluck, everywhere cluck cluck, with plant here and a plant there, here a plant, there a plant, everywhere plant. Burbank's first big order came in 1881 from Mrs. Warren Dutton. Oh, I work on Dutton Avenue. I wonder if they're related. A prosperous merchant who wanted 20,000 prune trees ready to set out that coming fall. It was an impossible task because prune seedlings grow very slowly, and it was already March. They could never be ready in time, but Burbank figured it might be done if prune buds were grafted or June budded into almond seedlings. He believed that the almond seedlings, being rapid growers, would force early budding of the prune buds, and he set to work. Okay, I'm going to read this, and then if it doesn't explain really what it is, I'll let you know. By June, Burbank had grown 20,000 almond seedlings. He began to graft the prune buds into the seedling. Okay, he sliced open an opening in each almond stalk, so in the branch of the almond tree, and inserted a prune bud. So he took part of the buds from the prunes and he stuck it in that almond tree. After a few days, when the buds had made good unions with the stalks, the tops of the almond seedlings were broken above the prune buds and left hanging, so the prune buds would be forced to grow. Miraculously, the buds burst and grew into seedlings, and by December, Burbank delivered the young prune trees to the satisfied and surprised customer. Gosh, this fellow must like prunes a lot, he thought. Okay, so it's trying to show a picture here. So here is the almond seedling, and then he stuck the prune buds in here, and I'm going to read what each of these steps are. So remember the pictures, because I can't read it because it's too tiny a print. Number 1, engrafted twigs are called scions, and the branch on which they are placed is called the stalk. So there it is. The scion is stuck into the stalk. Number 2, the scions are inserted in the stalk so that the inner bark of the scions, called the cambium layer, joins with the corresponding layer of the stalk. The scion and the stalk are covered with a grafting wax so it doesn't fall out. And the scion and the stalk are wrapped with cloth for added protection. So now all the healthy nutrients, the water and the nutrients going up the almond tree, now go into the prune parts, and they start growing and hopefully grow. All right, we'll see if they said that happened. With the success of the prune trees, Burbank's small nursery began attracting crowds of would-be buyers of this plant seeds. He kept increasing the size of his nursery with the profits. The profits are the money you earn. He kept increasing the size of, with the profits. In 1884, he had 4 acres of land in Santa Rosa and a house surrounded by greenhouse, barns, trees, and gardens. Here he carried out more than 100,000 experiments. Can you believe that? Involving 6,000 different kinds of plants. Many of the experiments were designed to create better plants by cultivating only the best variety of each generation. As he had done to create Burbank potato, this was called line breeding. In addition, he created new plants by mixing the pollen of one plant with the pollen of another. Plants are often crossbred accidentally in nature by pollen-carrying birds and insects by the wind, but Burbank did crossbreeding or hybridization. By hand, he carefully chose the plants he crossed, hoping for a new plant that would have the best qualities of both parent plants. His experiments took so much space that he sometimes grafted 100 different varieties into a single tree. That way he could produce fruit sooner and compare their qualities more easily. And I saw one tree, it was an apple tree, and there were lots of different apples growing on the one apple tree. So they're showing all different varieties of plants and fruits growing on one tree because he did the same grafting thing. That's really funny. What in tarnation do you call that, Luther? He said, a space saver. What is that tree? Space saver. If you go to the gardens, there's all different plants everywhere you look. Burbank's typical day began at 5 o'clock in the morning. He would go out into the hills of Santa Rosa looking for new and unusual plants. If he saw a particularly interesting one, he marked it with a piece of cloth so he could come back to gather its seeds when they were ripe. Sometimes he ran out of cloth and was forced to tear up his handkerchief or necktie or even pull a shoelace from his shoe. More than once he came flopping back to the nursery minus his shoelaces and parts of his clothing. Then he would go out and walk through the gardens surrounding his house to select the plants he wanted to keep for a particular variety he was seeking. The hundreds of rejected plants he would haul to the hillside and burn. As neighbors watched the giant bonfires, they wondered about the sanity of a man who seemed to grow things just to destroy them. This would go on until dark, and then Burbank would have an early supper and go to bed to be ready for another busy day. There we go. So it has him tying a shirt to this plant, and a shoelace to this plant, and a tie to this plant, and another shoelace to this plant. I want to come back and find it. That's cute. Oh, this is his house, and all those bags say U.S. mail. I guess he got popular and people began writing. See, and I saw that house. Here's the greenhouse next to the house here. House is white, I believe. By 1885, Burbank was well established in the nursery business. To his nursery, he added a farm of 18 acres in Sebastopol, California, where he raised his seeds and offered them for sale in England, Europe, the Orient, and Australia. As Burbank's experimental work became known outside Santa Rosa Valley, letters and seeds came pouring in. Enthusiastic fans sent him corn kernels from the grave of a Zulu king in Africa, seeds from the ruins of the cliff dwellers in the Grand Canyon, and even rock melon and cantaloupe seeds from New Guinea. Burbank made use of all of them by crossing them with California flowers and fruits to see what he could achieve. One of these was a special plum. Burbank had read a sailor's account of a luscious Japanese plum with juicy red meat. He dreamed of introducing it to American fruit growers, but his plum would not survive in many of the American climates and soils. So when he received 12 varieties of plum seedlings from Japan, he crossbred them with the sturdier but poorer fruit, American and European varieties. After several generations and thousands of crossings, he produced some of the finest plums ever known. And if you ever go in the store in the spring, you'll see one called the Santa Rosa plum. And that's one Luther Burbank made. And we use that one. It says, "Hey, Luther, what do you get when you cross a coweed and a plum?" I know. Plum crazy. Or is it a cowweed? Anyway. There we go. Somebody thinks they're funny. In 1888, Burbank sold part of his nursery business. All right, now here's a funny picture. Look at that for a little while. What the heck? We'll figure out what this means, what's going on. That's a funny picture. In 1888, Burbank sold part of his nursery business. He announced that it would be the future. He would work almost exclusively towards developing new and unusual plants. Then he took a long-needed vacation in Massachusetts. On his return trip to California, he became acquainted with a woman named Helen A. Coleman. 2 years later, they were married, but the marriage did not last. Burbank's wife yelled at him, nagged him, threatened to shoot him, bedeviled him, blackened both of his eyes, forced him to live in the barn. Finally, after 6 years of this, Burbank got a divorce. And it was a long time, over 20 years, before he ever thought of getting married again. Oh, that was his first wife. Woo! It says, "And stay out." Oh, my goodness. I understand he was a really quiet man, too. All right. So here, this thing is a cornucopia. And here is a book, and it says, "New Creations in Fruits and Flowers." There you go. During his successful time, Burbank was able to put together a catalog of his best crossbred plant varieties. Issued in June 1893, the 52-page brochure was entitled "New Creations in Fruits and Flowers." It was a cornucopia of new berries, plums, and prunes, 5 new seedling roses, a new puppy named Silver Lining. Oh, a new poppy. Not a new puppy. A new poppy named Silver Lining. And even a white blackberry. Oh, and we saw that at the gardens. Some of his experiments were also listed. They included crosses of peaches with almonds, plums with apricots, quinces with apples, and potatoes with tomatoes. Wow. Although some of these unusual crosses never produced marketable fruits and vegetables, particularly the potato and tomato combination, they were valuable as research to other experimenters. To Burbank's surprise, the catalog created a sensation, and he became internationally famous overnight. "A potato crossed with a tomato, Mr. Burbank? What would you call it? And he says, a mess. A mess. A tomato with a potato. Okay. So, there's all these people protesting, it looks like. It says, Burbank is up to no good. Down with Burbank. And the sign on the door says, gone planting. Oops. Looks like somebody's peeking out the window here. There were all kinds of reactions to Burbank's catalog. Not all of them were good. Storms of protest came from the religious and civic groups who thought no man could or should have the power of creation. Even so, within a year of the catalog's publication, all the plants and seeds listed in it were sold. Every year after that, Burbank's sales kept growing. In 1897, his gross sales exceeded $16,000. And by the time he was 50, Burbank found himself firmly established in the public eye as the Wizard of Horticulture and the Edison of horticulture mysteries. So Edison invented the light bulb, and Luther Burbank invents different types of plants. This guy says, hey, Luther, what do you get when you cross a lawnmower with a tomato? He says, I know, sliced tomatoes. Oh, dear. There's all these silly jokes. Uncle Terry likes silly jokes like this. Wow, look at all that cacti. Tons of it. Like I said, at his gardens today, there's a huge one. Burbank's largest single sale of $26,000, worth many times that amount today's money, was the result for one of the most amazing experiments. It was the removal of spines from desert cactus to make edible fodder for cattle. The work required breeding and crossbreeding hundreds of cactus varieties over a period of 20 years until a spineless variety evolved. But more than that, Burbank's final result was the spineless cactus that also bore fruit. Hey, Luther, what do you get when you cross a cactus with a buttered roll? And he says, I know, a sticky bun. Silly people. So cactus have all those spines. So he figured out how to grow the cactus without the spines so cattle could eat it without getting the spines stuck in his mouth. Here's the next picture. Looks like people with a photographer. Oh, the guy holding the light bulb. Do you think that's Thomas Edison? Let's see. What Burbank liked most about his fame were the friendships he made with other famous people the world over, including Henry Ford, who invented the automobile that people could afford, and Thomas Edison, who invented the light bulb. But what he didn't like about it was the crowd of reporters who were always around his home. They camped on his doorstep from before breakfast until late as midnight, reporting and exaggerating everything he did. Worst of all were the newspaper reports about his farm during the San Francisco earthquake of 1906, which also affected Santa Rosa. Luther Burbank's greenhouse and plants escaped damage, but his house, just a few feet away, suffered severe cracks during the quake, and the chimney was knocked down. Much to Burbank's dismay, the reporters made it sound as if supernatural powers had protected his work. You know, people don't tell you, they'll often tell you about the San Francisco earthquake in 1906, which was terrible. But in Santa Rosa, north of San Francisco, the earthquake hit harder. All right, looks like he found a new love, somebody new to marry. Probably not like the crazy lady. Even with his fame and success, Burbank often had trouble finding money to keep up with his experiments. Then in 1905, the Carnegie Institute in Washington, D.C. awarded him a grant. The institute was to pay him $10,000 a year for 10 years. He, in turn, would keep accurate records of his experiments to pass on through history, although with the grant came an expert to help Burbank write everything down. But the Institute could not accept Burbank's unique, unscientific method of record keeping. In addition, Burbank did not like taking time from his experiments to answer questions. Before long, the grant was canceled, and Burbank spent his remaining years at work on his own, just as before, except that years later, when he was 67, I'm 68, So he was very young. He was 67. He did acquire a partner, a new wife, Elizabeth Waters, for 40 years, who was 40 years younger than Burbank. 40 years younger. He married somebody 40 years younger than himself, and he was 67. So figure out the math. Uh, and a new wife, Elizabeth Waters, was 40 years younger than Burbank. But that didn't make any difference to him because she never yelled at him or blackened his eyes. So Burbank spent the remainder of his years quite content. Mr. Burbank, the Carnegie Institute would like to know how you created the Shasta daisy. It's one of my favorite flowers. And when it became my favorite flower, I didn't even know it was one that Luther Burbank invented. Let me see now. I first combined plant A14 with plant A17, or was that A16? Anyway, had to try a lot of experiments. So here's a drawing of the Shasta daisy down there. It has white on the outside and yellow on the inside, like on your mom's sweatshirt. Luther Burbank continued much to the wealth and good eating of the nation and the world. But during his lifetime, he was a controversial figure, and his scientific work was denounced in newspaper and from pulpits. People put it down. It was mainly his work in crossbreeding that upset people. Most plant breeders of the time considered it somehow improper to cross, for example, an apple with a blackberry. But Luther Burbank made the attempt as naturally as he would reach down to pick a flower. In spite of criticism, the public took Burbank to its heart and fame, and the honors were showered on him. There's no doubt that his plums and potatoes alone, Burbank must be ranked among the most successful breeders in horticulture history. Besides them is placed the Shasta daisy, his most successful flower. Other successes have been lost with time. That's because tastes change and breeders are always at work trying to produce something better. Few new creations remain in seed catalogs for more than 5 or 10 years. So, of the more than 800 fruits and flowers that Burbank improved, only a few still remain. Still, he has no equal, and his plants are the ancestors of many today's vegetables and flowers. For this reason, his work is immortal. Isn't that fun? Learning about Luther Burbank like that. And it has a little bit here at the end of the book about Robert Quackenbush, the author. It says, is a popular author and artist of over 160 books for young people, including a number of biographies. He is notable for his wit and humor. He wrote over 160 books. His story of Luther Burbank was inspired by childhood memories of his mother and grandmother, who were gardening enthusiasts, telling him about Luther Burbank and his remarkable work. Well, that's pretty interesting. And of course, the back cover are his plants, mostly the cactus there. And then there's stuff at the back of the book. All right. Thank you, and thank you for your visit, and I hope you have a Merry Christmas. Love you.